Yes, but we are here at the moment, and good morning to all. Uh, it is a lovely sunny day, April out there. It's supposed to be 20 today. Isn't that nice? But we are here for a certain purpose. I'll introduce you now to David and Alan, who will progress with an interesting topic, which is a little beyond me, so I shall allow them to introduce themselves. David and Alan, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Ray. This came out of a discussion at the end of a talk from Alan, and I can't, well, of course, one could go back and watch the video, but I can't quite remember how it arose, but it was along the lines of Quaker peace testimony, and I was saying probably something about meditation and peace.
Yes, you were.
And Patsy's idea, I think, was to have a conversation, and I don't know quite where it came up in my mind, but that it doesn't sound initially, may not sound initially like a peace topic, but I had the idea of a title, Higher States of Consciousness, because in my experience of meditation, it's the development of more orderly states. There's a high correlation between the brain waves that emerge in meditation, the orderliness of the brain waves, and orderliness and coherence in the community. And there's now a huge amount of research on that, and it's so a little bit. I'm reaching around in my head because I'm almost over prepared. I've got 3 or 4 different ways I could come into this, and oh, now that's interesting. It's changed. No, that's all right. So it's the view that it's meant to be. I've got a pile of books on human potential. I'll just flash up a couple of my favorites. Abraham Maslow, The Further Reaches of Human Nature, and Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, The Phenomenon of Man, Le Phenomenon Humain. And, you know, there are all sorts of great authors and writers who have written about human potential. Now, I had a little bit of feedback there. If people can mute when they're not talking, then it will the recording will come out better because there won't be echoes in it. And I've got a slideshow that I made some time ago that I could select from, but there's far too many slides in it, actually. but I've got a couple of slides that might make sense at some point. And I've got my own personal journey, which is that as a young man, age 26, 52 years ago, so a third of the way into my life so far, I was working in Newcastle in technology as a computer programmer, but I was interested in all sorts of things, including, you know, peace movements, hippies, meditation, and so on. But I never saw anything that really appealed to me. And in fact, I thought it was probably a lightweight topic, having seen the Beatles roaring off to India with the Maharishi. And then one day I was with some friends and they said, oh, we were just talking about life, the universe and everything. And one of them said, oh, there's a whole page article in The Guardian about meditation. And as a young socialist at the time, I thought that the Guardian was sort of next to tablets of stone with commandments on it. You know, it was almost Mosaic writ. So that the Guardian would carry an article I thought was really interesting. And it had at bottom a picture of Maharishi with the Beatles and the caption, Britain's 20,000 meditators have kept a low profile since the Beatles episode, which sort of sounded like it was a bit of an embarrassment. And at the top, there was a picture of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi at the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston with astronaut Rusty Schweickart. And I thought, oh, that's cool, if he's into that sort of thing, that tech. And the article went on to say that this meditation that Maharishi was teaching needn't be thought of as mystical. It was a practical technique that anybody could practice. It wasn't a change of lifestyle, and so on. And it was being used in all sorts of places. It was being taught to the US Army and so on. And I had this sort of naive, youthful flash because I'd looked at other gurus and sort of dismissed them. And then I had the thought, well, no, this is it. And if it isn't it, nothing is. And I didn't define it, but I wrote to the Transcendental Meditation Movement, and I got a postcard back that there was going to be a talk in Newcastle where I was living. And there was this young woman standing at the front of a lecture theatre in the university, talking very intelligently and inspiringly and in a slightly hippie way about meditation. And I was saying things like, so I was looking for the science, and she was saying, when people meditate, it creates a very beautiful atmosphere. And I thought, well, yes, that could quite conceivably be true, because she had a real presence about her, which was, magnetic, engaging, clear. But I thought, I'm not sure that we could, that the way that you're talking would go down well in a boardroom, as it were. It didn't sound quite businesslike. Anyway, I learned to meditate, and only a couple of years later, Maharishi set off on a world tour, as part of which he came to England, and as part of which he came to Durham. He was in London and Edinburgh and Birmingham, I think, but he came to Durham. And I went to that talk and got to speak to him, and thanked him for the meditation, and sort of said, is there anything I could do to help? And he asked if I was a teacher of meditation. And I said, no. I thought probably that he was actually an enlightened man, and that he could probably see that I was steeped in ignorance and far from worthy. But he said, then it will be good to become a teacher of meditation. And I went, oh, wow, okay, great. I sort of, if he thinks so, you can't really feel unworthy if you have the master's warrant. So a couple of years later, less than a year and a half later, I was on a 6-month course in Switzerland in a town called Mürren, and learning to teach meditation and learning lots of the background about meditation and practicing it for extended periods as well. And the thing that it was like the highlight of the course was a 2-week segment called Higher States of Consciousness. And it was sort of like everybody was really excited about this, because this was going to be about human potential. But one of the, I had already come across a book by a man called Anthony Campbell, and it was Anthony Campbell, 7 States of Consciousness, a vision of possibilities suggested by the teaching of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And I want to sort of touch lightly on it, and but I'm interested to bounce backwards and forwards with Alan, and and just see where I absolutely can't imagine getting through anything like a tenth of the material that I've got lying around here on my desk, and I could come into my experiences with peace topics. So, because a couple of years after the training course, um, I found myself on a plane going to Damascus on a peace project, where a group of us were going to meditate there. Um, we thought it was very funny at the time because the group was just 8 on this plane, and we were told that we were going to bring peace to the Middle East, and there was shooting going on in Beirut. There was a civil war going on in the Lebanon, and we were quite amused at the idea that 8 people could jump on a plane, Heathrow, go to the Middle East and bring peace. But we very quickly found out that our job was pathfinders and that we were to find hotels for more meditators to arrive, and that this was happening in other parts. It was happening in Cyprus and it was happening in Israel. And after a month of meditating in an atmosphere that initially felt really cramped, the atmosphere sort of seemed relaxed and the shooting stopped in Beirut. And there's a difference between sitting on a Zoom call and hearing from somebody that meditation can bring peace, and going somewhere and sitting in the middle of a war zone and meditating for a while and finding peace breaking out, and having one's own experience track that. Start off feeling, when I arrived, it sort of felt, when you sat down to meditate, it felt like there was a band round your head, quite a tight band round your head. And then, and we were told it was just going to be us meditating. We weren't to try and recruit people. It wasn't a evangelical campaign. And in fact, Maharishi said, you're not here to teach meditation. They won't be interested while there is fear in their hearts. And so there came a time when peace was breaking out, when the 3 Syrian girls who were running the hotel that we were staying in walked out of their office and came up to us and said, "We don't know what you're doing, but we know that it is good and we would like to learn." And it just felt that was like a tipping point. That was a sign, because this was quite spontaneous. And the group was split in 2 hotels, and the leaders of the British TM movement were in the other hotel. And we called them up and said, "Look, people are interested to learn. Yes. So what should we do about it? I think Maharishi would be interested in that." And they called him in Switzerland and told him, and he set up a group phone call and explained that that we had created some kind of atmosphere of peace. And
sorry.
Sorry? Somebody said something. Oh, is that you, Patsy? Patsy's got something to do. So that was my first experience of.
Forgive me.
Do you want to mute your microphone for a moment, Patsy, whilst you're running around? Oh, she's good enough. So, and at that point, I mean, many years later, this intersects with Quaker interests for, Quaker testimony, Quaker action for peace. And so there's an opportunity. It seems to me that there's an opportunity here, and especially at this moment. So yesterday, I was standing outside Bridewell police station with this vigil for peace, Quaker Vigil for Peace being called because the Westminster Meeting House had been raided by the Met. And 20 police arrived to arrest 6 girls. And their method of arriving was to, batter the lockdown. I've got a story along similar lines from when I was with the meditation group in Iran. But, when somebody batters a door down, it automatically sets the heart aflutter, that's for sure. You know that it's not somebody arriving for a nice cup of tea. Although I love it that one of the Quaker ladies talking about this afterwards said, I didn't know what to do, but I made tea and I didn't give them any. to show my disapproval. And I can't find the picture, but it's like in a private eye. And there's a picture outside Westminster Meeting House. And it's like a private eye picture, and it says it's got Quaker Meeting House. And there's a little thought bubble coming up. And it says, "You have the right to remain silent," which is quite lovely. So I want to briefly describe what the 7 states of consciousness are, but I'm going to give a clue, and that is that the first 3 are quite familiar to us, and they are: deep sleep is a state of consciousness in which we are not thinking and we're not aware. And dreaming is a state of consciousness in which we're not necessarily aware. Sometimes people are partly aware of dreams. I woke up with noticing a dream this morning, but we're less aware. We're not normally aware. But there's mental activity. And then waking consciousness is kind of characterized by thinking thoughts. So I'm aware and I'm thinking thoughts. I am aware and there is mental activity. And that's the launch pad for higher states of consciousness. And I hope there'll be a few moments to just go into that. But I thought to stop now and just see, just having introduced the idea of meditation, which to me is a skill in using the mind that one learns, but it sits alongside Quaker testimony for peace. And when I learned to meditate, I found quite a lot of meditators were already Quakers or had grown up as Quakers. So there was some kind of crossover. And I think that was in my mind when I was first invited to go to a Quaker meeting. And I'm interested in what Quakers think. But just to show that this big thick book here was published, is Maharishi's Program to Create World Peace. So this is a big fat book. So it's not an idle comment that meditators are interested in peace. It was that Maharishi had a big focus on that. And it turns out that his legacy is a program that was taught in the far distant past that's described in yogic texts. And it's intended to be capable of creating what Indians call Ram Raj. Ram Raj means an ideal society, a peaceful society. So that's in the air at the moment. And I think it's of interest to anyone and everyone. I mean, we're in such challenging times at the moment. I mean, basically yesterday or the day before, Donald Trump launched a world economic war. Nothing less than that, and it's hugely disruptive and never has the need for people to be able to settle in their hearts and live peacefully been greater. But Alan, you've welcome and hello, and do you have any thoughts and reflections at this?
Quite a lot, David. Both before this session started, I was jotting some things down based both on what you said in your email a few days ago and also recalling our initial conversation that came off the back of my talk. And what it's when you talked about the Maharishi back then, when was it, November or something like that, I went to my own experiences of meditation, which came out of a Buddhist tradition. And what I'm interested, I think, or what's the track I've gone down is moments of crisis, which just dovetails with what you've just said now about these events of the last 2 days. Things very much coming to a head, but they've been accumulating ever more rapidly for a long time, and suddenly we get this sort of break point. But I first came into meditation before becoming seriously involved with Quakers in any way, I think in the late 80s. And I was kind of in extremis because I was married to a Russian lady at the time, and she was very, very volatile, and I wasn't coping. And what happened with me was I went, there's an outfit in East London, it was in Bethnal Green, a group of West, it's called the Western Buddhist Order, Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. They've gone into they went into a kind of meltdown because their founder turned out to be a child abuser, or not later on. But in those days, I never heard anything about that. But I remember being introduced in that course to the Thich Nhat Hanh book, The Miracle of Mindfulness. So that was my jumping off point. And the point about the teaching of meditation, the way they did it, was the same as what you heard from Maharishi, which is, although we liked you to, in other words, become a Buddhist and sort of do the whole thing as far as sitting positions and all the other things are concerned, they said basically we are not mystics. But they were using the word mystic in a very particular way, I would now say. But we're just giving you some practical techniques. And they started off with an exercise called mindfulness of breathing, deep breathing, just noticing, bringing the mind back, just to concentrating on the body. Breathing awareness first of all, and then body awareness. And then after maybe quarter of an hour of that, just doing that, sitting very still and just noticing breathing and body and all of that, we then moved into what's called in the Buddhist tradition, metta bhavana, which is developing compassion. And what they're saying is, and I think this very much coincides with what I later learned through psychotherapy training, very much later in the 90s and onwards. Sorry, no, anyway, whatever about meditation is that you start from the self and you start from the body and you move outwards in concentric circles in developing compassion. So you start off with sort of introducing into the breathing the thought, may I be happy, or may I be contented, something like that. And then that develops outward in concentric circles until you are, the final version of this particular meditation is, you then start developing, in interim, you just start developing a compassion for people you don't particularly like, individuals, and then you move outwards from there to people who would be classed as definite enemies. And then you're also extending this compassion ultimately to all living beings, in whatever way that is, or to the whole of creation for that matter. So there are many, many parallels. So one point I wanted to make, I think, is that it doesn't matter where your jumping off point is at all, nor the specificity of any particular tradition. I think this is immaterial because it crops up in human experience all over the place in all sorts of times. And just yesterday, I'm in contact locally with a chap who used to head the BBC office in Moscow, and he's had various mental health difficulties, as I have, and he sent me something just last night about a man, again in extremis, much more than anything I've experienced. He was a British agent captured by the Nazis in France and interrogated, and he taught himself without knowing anything. He was a young man in his 20s, quite naive, not highly educated. And he just devised for himself a method of staying sane and staying in control of his own destiny in the most extreme circumstances by introducing rhythm in his 5-foot by 10-foot cell in this prison in France. And just so it would be very, very like what Buddhists call walking meditation. So that was one strand. And he just kept himself sane by introducing music and rhythm. Music was actually forbidden, so he got himself into trouble. But if he just paced, he developed patterns of pace in an elliptical move around his 5-foot by 10-foot cell. And there are many, many records of people in extreme confinement or extreme circumstances finding a way of hanging on to their sanity despite enormous assaults on their being and threats and so forth, which dovetails with what you said about Damascus. So another thought, I just happened to two things. One is I just happened to buy out of Aid Books an autobiography of a lady who unfortunately died last year, Camilla Carr, who actually went to work with the Quaker Chris Hunter in Chechnya and was kidnapped. And she and her boyfriend were kidnapped. And this is her autobiography. I don't remember how it was that I suddenly decided to acquire this. But Chris Hunter was actually my supervisee in Russia in the early 90s. And then he went on to do a great deal of fantastic work in the North Caucasus, including Chechnya and so on. And he would, in the first Chechen war, he was engaged in a Buddhist meditation group, a Russian Buddhist meditation group, or Russian Japanese, to trying to bring peace to Chechnya. It didn't actually work, of course, as we know. But I just wanted to read you something from the blurb, which coincides with a lot of what you've been saying, and I have. So just after they started working in this Little Star Rehabilitation Center for war traumatized children in Grozny, just as they were beginning to see the children begin to smile and play again, they were kidnapped at gunpoint. There followed 14 months incarceration in homes that varied from a concrete box with no natural light or fresh air to a pink trompe-l'oeil bedroom via a sauna and various cellars. They experienced everything from rape, mental torture, and the threat of execution to moments of compassion and kindness. And then the next paragraph, in deep physical shock and never knowing whether they would live or die, they decided to use for their survival the many techniques they had learned from practicing Tai Chi, yoga, and meditation, their humor and their belief in the power of prayer and love. They sought to create a dialogue with their captors and to look beneath their masks of fear and anger, hoping to find a small flame of humanity and laughter that had not been extinguished by the demonizing nature of war. And to me, that really sums it up in terms of Quaker approaches to peace building that I've been fortunate enough to be involved in, particularly in former Yugoslavia. And that's what happens, is that it's not this pat thing that there is that of God in everyone, but that you find a way of self-calming to such a degree that you can engage in dialogue with almost anybody.
Mm.
I think I'm not as sanguine as you are, David, about the practical effects of large scale or lots of people meditating, but I'm thinking of the gathered meeting and the energies that can come out of that. So that's one strand. And of course, not all meetings are gathered in that sense. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're very tedious, and sometimes they're downright annoying when people get on their hobby horses and so forth. So yeah, it's quite a mixture. But the other thing lots of other things were striking me. One was my own experience of prayer, which again came out of extremis, out of that very difficult relationship. I actually had one morning a very sudden suicidal epic. There'd been a long build-up to this, a suicidal impulse, and I almost went under a tube train at London Bridge Station. And I was terrified. I didn't want to, but I was hallucinating, and I felt I was being impelled onto the tracks. And a very, very vivid recollection of it. And how I survived, and I can't give you a mechanism for it, I can only record the experience, is that out of my considerable rationalistic skepticism, I suddenly found myself praying like a 4-year-old by his bedside, as I'd once been taught by my mother to do, and praying in that infantile state, if I can put it that way, to the figure of Jesus, as taught back in the early 50s. So this is a question for me about petitionary prayer, really. What is a petitionary prayer, and does it work at all, or how does prayer operate? Because so many people have spoken about that. And what I said in my very simple prayer was, help me. It was an acknowledgement of my total powerlessness out of will to alter my situation in that moment. And I felt I was going onto the track. But all of a sudden, rather like the band round your head, I was released from that. And lo and behold, I got onto the train, arrived at my desk in Friend's house in Euston, half an hour later, just about crossed the road, and was found at my desk during the lunch hour, gibbering and incoherent and unable to function whatsoever. Long aftermath, and it's the origin of my deep involvement with psychotherapy. So one final point, and then I'll stop and let you resume. And I've lost the plot, so you might as well resume anyway. So this happens a lot. So, yeah. And Angela.
Well, I'd just like to say I learned TM meditation in 1980. I had been 7 weeks in hospital. It was the low point of my life. My daughters were aged 15 and 13. I can't believe in September I will have a daughter aged 60, but I will. And I was 7 weeks, as I said, in the Woolwich General Hospital with this mysterious, it was stress related. I was a teacher, I'd become a single parent, and in the hospital, they didn't know what was wrong with me. You know, I could have told them I'm stressed out of my bloody mind, but there you go, I'm a teacher and so on. And when I came out of hospital, first of all, my sister-in-law said, why don't you come and stay with me for half a term? We did. We went to Shropshire. My daughters had to go to another school, but it was great. And then when I came back, I thought, what can I do as a strategy. And I tried various things, but TM was the one thing that works, and going for a long walk. And now, I mean, I'm very pragmatic. Every morning before I get up, I put my timer on for 20 minutes and I meditate. And I really agree with you, Alan, everything you've said. I'm more pragmatic, I'm more down to earth, but that works. And then I do another meditation in the evening as well. So yes, I think I'm recommending. And I do think, I talk quite a bit in China, humans find the equivalent of TM. Quakers have found, meeting for worship. I'm quite convinced it helps your mind. It releases your mind from pressure. So I think I'm agreeing with you, Alan. TM is really important. My daughter does mindfulness, actually, which is a similar kind of strategy. So it is strategies.
When you start when you're in a room with a group of interesting people, the conversation, there's always wonderful things to spark off from. When your point on trauma, Alan, I studied for some years with a modern German mystic called Thomas Hübl, and he's quite, well, to my mind, quite a young man. And he went on retreat for a few years and achieved some sort of level of higher order thinking and being. And he teaches, so he's really interested in working with people like Holocaust survivors and so on. And he is very clear that a lot of people are traumatized, and that the trauma can be, it can be a space where you've sort of pushed something aside and put it, in a capsule, and it's sort of like, I don't want to deal with that. And he describes this. I went to a weekend course that he ran in Berlin at the Free University, about the Holocaust, healing the wounds from the Holocaust. And he had Germans and Jews. Of course, the Jews were Germans, but sort of, you know what I mean by that. He had Germans and Jews of 3 generations there. And at one point, so one day was talks from amazing people, and then the second day was a workshop, and he set people exercises, and he'd say, I want you to do this, and then any questions. And at one point he said, I want you to pick a partner, someone you don't know, and each of you is going to speak for 15 minutes. One of you is A and one of you is B. A, you're going to tell the other person for 15 minutes about growing up in an atmosphere of guilt. B, then you swap. B is going to do that. Any questions? No questions. Nobody didn't understand or feel that it was going to be a problem for them, talking about Germans, Jews, 3 generations, and and me. So I picked someone and I said, why don't you go first and I'll explain afterwards. And when it was my turn, I said, I'm British. I didn't grow up in an atmosphere of guilt. But do you know who invented the concentration camp? And she sort of looked at me as though I was going to make an accusation or something. I said, it was British in the Boer War. And I said, can you think of any culture that's systematically enslaved millions before World War II? And she sort of looked at me again, and I said, it was the British in the slave trade. And she said, which was lovely, she said, wow, she said, I've been to London and they didn't tell me that. And I said, we don't put it in our tourist literature. But Thomas's bit was, and the point is, everybody in that room understood that. And I understood my little bit of exceptionalism, that I'd grown up a little bit self-righteous in a country that had no right or reason to be self-righteous. I grew up unconscious of national trauma. And so I'm tempted to just in 2 seconds, if I can find it, I want to share a picture. But it does depend on whether I can find it or not. And if I can't, I will treat that as a sign from God. Oh, right, here we are. This is a slideshow that I sort of marked up a little bit, and I'm going to whiz through to the point. Yeah, there you go. And here's a little quote there. This is from Maharishi in 1962. Today, the fight is not between religions. It's not a fight between races. It's not a fight between different ways of living. Today, the fight is between spirit and matter. Matter seems to have grown in great glamour and has challenged the validity of the soul. It's now for the divine plan to maintain the harmony between matter and the soul so that real progress may be possible. And to me, it seems that the world is at the crisis point between matter and spirit at the moment. It's risen to another. And these are, I've got all these little scientific, this is an interesting one from my scientific background, that you have that systems have different energy levels. They have excited states and less excited states. And the least excited states are the most orderly. And so meditation is about taking the mind from an excited state to an inner, more orderly state, more settled, which has an effect on the physiology as well as the mind. I just want to, and this has a bearing on what you said about your experience with prayer, Alan. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the point is, at some point, for whatever reason, people may have a peak experience, right? It's an experience of a shift of consciousness where whatever else was going on falls away. And there there could be 100,000 different triggers, but Maslow has said that they're all peak experiences. And in my diagram that I had of more excited and less excited states, it's that the mind flips. And I've had this. The mind just detaches from the surface level and becomes expanded in some way, and the experience is different. And it quite often, when you say you were found babbling at your desk later in the day, I'm not in the least surprised, because there can be a great release of trauma and stress at that time, and the body's not able to handle it. And Maslow basically says, having had your peak experience, you're then set loose on a trail where you have to build physiological stability. You have to take care of your comfort needs. You have to you build a whole system around yourself in order to eventually be able to maintain a state of being in that higher state whilst active in the world. And that's Stephen Covey. Oh, this is a sweet one. This is where one of the first things I heard about the relationship between meditation and Christianity was from a man called Vincent Snell, who was leading the TM movement at the time. And he said, a lot of what we see in our religious texts is off balance and misinterpreted. And he said, you can have a phrase, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and the comma can be put in the wrong place. An evangelical may say, seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and it's an injunction to be righteous. But if it's read correctly, according to Vincent, seek ye first the kingdom of God. The kingdom of heaven is within you. And his righteousness and all these things will be added unto you. In other words, the diving within, you're not diving within looking for a righteous God. You're diving within to find this inner kingdom of heaven. And because you're doing this, righteousness is added unto you. In the mechanics of TM, your physiology is purified. And this is the first scientific diagram I saw about meditation, and it came from a physicist, well, I don't know whether he's a physicist, a scientist called Dimitri Kanellakis, working at the Stanford Research Institute. And he came up with this diagram of being thinking and not thinking, being aware and not aware. And you can easily pop those three normal states of consciousness: waking consciousness, I'm aware and I'm thinking, yes? And dreaming is I'm thinking, but I'm not aware. And deep sleep is I'm neither aware nor thinking. So what is transcending? It's not thinking and being aware. And in TM, a lot of meditations and contemplations, you're given a thought that you consider, but in TM, you start off at the surface level of the mind. You know, the mind's active, engaged in the world, the eyes are open. You close the eyes, you settle down, and you start thinking a particular thought that you're given, a mantra. And the effect of the mantra is to reduce mental activity. So it's like if I'm talking and I start talking more quietly, then you're hearing less, but you're listening a bit harder. So meditation, your awareness is settling, but the thought is becoming more and more subtle. And it can be that it reaches a settled level of awareness where you're aware only of awareness. The thinker and the thinking and the thought are become one. There isn't a thought, you're just aware of your inner awareness. I'm going to free you from that now and pop back out. So, and that's 4 states of consciousness, that transcending, and that can become stabilized so that, oh, I'm in this state. There's a level in me that's just aware and just watching and witnessing. And these other things are going on, thinking, thoughts, and everything. And that's not a state of unity. In Maharishi's teaching, that's a state of duality, because there's one level of the mind that's fully expanded and another level of the mind that everything else is going on, and you're witnessing it. So it's like you're at the bottom of the ocean and you're engaged at the surface of the ocean as well. But by regularly alternating, the idea is that this becomes integrated and we start to be able to experience subtler levels of mind whilst being aware. And that gives rise to higher states. And the highest state unity is when one is experiencing the whole range from gross to subtle, from matter to consciousness, in terms of this experience of the self, me. It's not that there's things going on out there, it's that I'm settled in myself and I'm experiencing everything that's happening in terms of my inner self. So that's how you get a book written called 7 States of Awareness. And Maharishi talks about a man in a state of unity and would explain Christ's experience, I and the Father am one, as this expanded state of being fully in tune with an unbounded field of consciousness, the divine. So, you know, mystical and scientific start to become intertwined. And I find that, you know, very inspiring and lovely, even while, of course, the world gets more and more chaotic, and at times it becomes harder and harder to find the quiet space. But when that's true, that's actually strengthening the mind. Maharishi at one point said, yes, wind blows hot, wind blows cold. After a while, you're weatherproof. And so that's meditation and action.
David, could I just pop in?
Yes. Sorry,
one is pursuing the strand of peak experiences. I'm thinking of two in my own life. One in 1969, coming from the then Yugoslav island of Korčula, it's now part of Croatia, on a hydrofoil and being visited. I'd spent a week in a tent, almost face down, with tonsillitis and being jabbed in the bum by a nun with penicillin to try and reduce my fever. And then on the way back, there was this hydrofoil ferry which threw out plumes of spray either side, because it was traveling, I don't know, 20 knots or something, and huge plumes of spray. And we were visited by a school of dolphins. We were on the outer deck, and they just danced in the spray either side of the boat for about 20 minutes, half an hour maybe. It was just, so that's a kind of thing, I suppose you could say, well, in a sense, it came out of crisis. I've just been sick. But it's not as extreme as suddenly being about to go under a tube train. But then I thought, I remember ministering once about this experience of the tube train, and a thought had popped into my mind, which was a film I saw, a British film from the 1950s, called black and white film Sound Barrier, about the development of the jet engine. And the one thing I remember from that film is this, that the plane which was approaching the sound barrier was about trying to go through the sound barrier, and the pilot was straining with all his might and main to push or pull, I forget which, the joystick in a certain direction, and it wouldn't. And all of a sudden, he pulled the joystick in the opposite direction, and he was through the sound barrier. And that is a very familiar experience to me, and it's introduced that I just wanted to sidestep. I just happened at the same time to have picked up a biography of Dennis Finch Hatton, Karen Blixen's lover, and who they went flying together over the mountains of Kenya. And she said of that peak experience, rather like the dolphins one, in a letter to him, it's worth having lived and suffered, been ill, and had all the difficulties to have lived for this week, which was flying in a monoplane over the Aberdare Mountains. And so that's the other strand that's come back into my head is another thing we spoke about originally, or I introduced, which was this book, The Master and His Emissary, by Ian McGilchrist. And I couldn't remember the name of the subsequent book, which is about 3,000 pages long. And I haven't got it. I just went to Amazon to try and remind myself of what the theme was. It's the development of this business of left-right brain asymmetry, and the fact that certain, or in his thesis, certain periods of our experience, world experience, are dominated either by left brain or right brain thinking, and he characterizes the pre-modern period or medievalism as basically right brain, which is to say more dwelt in prayer, meditation, and so forth, and then a flip through the Renaissance and the Enlightenment towards our modern state, where we're kind of analytically and rationalistically inclined, which is what he's calling a left brain dominance. But it's not either or, they're both in relation to one another. The question is there an imbalance? And he's arguing that there's, in our world, has been for 300-400 years, maybe 500 years, an imbalance that needs correcting. And I was thinking also of left-right symmetry in another way, which is the way our bodies are shaped. And the fact that there is a duality in the way our bodies are constructed, with the heart on one side slightly, and being in touch with aspects of self which are not directly related to sort of hard thinking or rationalistic thinking. And the reviewer on Amazon, which just to remind myself about this subsequent book, is called The Matter with Things. And the reviewer's summary, I just picked out one thing. She says, the essence of the thesis, this huge, long, highly referenced book, is rebalancing towards the right brain where our deepest wisdom resides. And I just felt that this was very close to what we've been talking about, a rebalancing towards where our deepest wisdom resides. And it's very much to do with meditation and its effects and what comes out of it. To me, it seems it's not something direct, it's something, the product is indirect. You go inwards and then things happen which are outside your voluntary control. You just develop, whether it's a deeper sense or higher sense of consciousness, whatever it is, out of which your perspective has shifted very profoundly. I'm reminded also of Thomas Kuhn, his Structure of Scientific Revolutions. It was a very popular book in the 1970s, particularly when I read it. And he's talking about normal and revolutionary science. And revolutionary science is arises out of people being mavericks, basically. In other words, they're not in the general stream of the way thought is going, but they are, he's talking about Einstein, various scientific revolutionaries who completely alter the paradigm, which was the central word he's using. The predominant paradigm shifts quite suddenly, actually in a moment of theoretical crisis, onto a totally different plane, and it's coming out of, let's put it mildly, a quirky mind, which isn't following the standard method, but is somehow accessing different ways of imagining. I'm linking that to creativity and this unification of left, right, and rebalancing, and thinking also another thing that popped into my mind. It often happens with me. I'm thinking of one thing and something apparently totally unrelated then pops up. And the one that popped up this morning whilst making my notes was the childhood toy, the stereoscope. You know, the thing where you looked in and you had this dial and you twiddled a knob and the thing went round, and you had two different images taken from the position of the left eye and the right eye, and they throw the image, instead of having a 2D image, you have a 3D image. And I'm wondering whether this rebalancing and accessing a higher state of conscience is like rebalancing left and right hemispheres and their influence on us, and throwing things into relief so that they're experienced differently, out of which new insights arise. Something like that.
Yeah. There's when I was early last year, the TM movement ran an experiment in India and had 10,000 meditators in Hyderabad. And it had all these dignitaries from different orders of the sort of, sacred orders and holy groups on the stage, and some Americans with CAT scanners, not MRIs, whatever it is, brain scanners, right? And they were showing the level of connection between the hemispheres and between the front and the back that appear very, very clear in the scans. And they even had the person whose brain was being scanned, they got everybody in the room to start meditating at the same time. And they did it with a gesture that person couldn't see because they had their eyes closed. And the brain waves just changed at that moment when people dive deep. So the coherence isn't just from left to right, but it's from person to person within the group, and it extends beyond the group. And that's where you get the idea that the square root of 1% of a population practicing this technique together. And it was Maharishi, before he passed on, mentioned at one point that to one of the professors at the university he'd founded in America, said, "You will find the what he taught as the yogic flying program, the TM City program, you will find it in the Yoga Vasishta." And it's described very, very accurately and precisely and recognizably in this really ancient text. And it's being described as it's being taught to this young prince, Lord Rama. And he is being told that if he teaches his people this technique, it will create an ideal civilization. And it goes on to say that there is not, nor will there ever be, a more effective technique for creating a higher civilization. So that's why there are groups now, and this became a sort of interfaith thing, something that had been nurtured within the TM movement. All of a sudden, these religious leaders were saying, "Well, I want my people doing this. I'll set up a 10,000 group. I'll have my people practicing this." And that's sort of being done at the moment. It's not easy to set up a permanent group of 10,000 people practicing they have to be taught first, and they have to be practicing it. And you have to find facilities and feed them and all the rest of it. But that's actually happening. So there's some hope that there will be large groups of people practicing techniques which are scientifically shown to produce coherent brain waves, and which are known to originate in this Vedic culture of India. It's a remarkable time. Yeah, sorry.
Just off that thought, just one thought that was occurring simultaneously with me before you introduced it, or as you were introducing it, which is another book which is downstairs, and I'm not sure. I think the surname of the author is Kilpatrick, and I can't remember the title, but it's about the influence of Indian civilization on the whole of Asia from about 400 BC. It I was reading a little while back, because I flip between books when I'm reading all the time. I just sort of tend to have 10 or so on the go all at once. Is about the Emperor Ashoka, who adopted Buddhism, having met a mendicant meditator on the roadside and stopped and talked to him, and discovering the man was a Buddhist. And then saying, "I want to learn everything you know." And Ashoka had expanded his empire enormously, extreme ruthlessness and militarism. And then he abandoned that and taught everybody that they ought to be Buddhists, basically.
There you go. That's what we need. There's one last. There's a former, well, a teacher at MIT who grew up on going to a Steiner school and living on a biodynamic farm. His name's Otto Scharmer, and he's now a professor at MIT, and he teaches what he calls presencing as a technique, and it's about settling through the levels of the mind. He talks about its open mind, open heart, and open will, and teaches exercises for people to experiencing themselves coming to these deeper levels. And he says what happens when you're in a deeper level is that what comes out isn't based on our habits. It's not based on our old mental patterns. It's what needs to emerge. And so he's got a book called Leading from the Emerging Future, based on this idea of diving in the mind. He calls it presencing. And I was, maybe some other time I'll do a tribute talk, but when I worked for Martin Connolly in Stokes Croft, he was a shaman, and he was intuitively practicing what Otto Scharmer called these things. But Otto Scharmer called it presencing, and Martin called it holding a space. And Otto Scharmer called what emerges at that time as crystallizing ideas, and Martin called it going for coffee. and turning those ideas into something real, Scharmer called prototyping, and Martin called it laying down markers. So, but we discover if we're in tune enough with our own processes, then we discover the natural ways for us to bypass the difficulties or have breakthroughs that crash through the barriers, and then somehow stabilize in our lives these potential higher states of integrated awareness.
I have been listening to your conversations, and although I may disagree with some of them, I think this is the right road to go. But as history tells us, change usually comes through conflict. And this conflict is going, she's gone. This conflict is going on at the moment in a more bigger way than it has before, with the crisis in capitalism, which we've seen from America at the moment, which we and the rest of the world experiences. And I think we are coming to that state at the moment, and it's which road we take down from there, where we will get to that type of idea. But I remember as a young hippie meditating with my group, and as we called it euphemistically, the vibes man, which emulated from us to others and to others, and we became that living community. But a lot more can be said for this. But sadly, we have reached to nearly 20 past 12, my friends.
Oh, yeah.
So may I ask others if there are any questions and comments?
And can I quickly ask Kate, we normally sort of send out to people a link to the talk and so on. I don't have your email, so could you either put your email in the chat, or I'll put mine in.
You're muted, Kate.
I've just put it in the chat.
Okay, great. Yeah, I see it. Thank you. Lovely. Any comments, Kate? Thank you for being a guest with us.
Oh, that was very interesting. Yes, that was lovely. It wasn't what I expected, but it was lovely.
Cool. Wonderful.
Hope we see you at future talks anyway. You're always welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Patsy and David and Ray, I don't think I get your standard emails of future topics, or I'm not aware of having done so. I did last year sometime.
You should have got.
Sorry?
Sorry, don't mean to interrupt you. I think I consciously copied you in to this month, but
Yes.
I might not have done.
I think you did possibly this.
Oh, right.
The one I gate crashed, I wasn't aware of, when we had the dates wrong.
Right.
I wasn't aware of that talk, so that was a kind of bonus.
Well, that's fine. No, I have to be careful to do that because, of course, we're a multi.
Yeah. All over the place.
A multiple group rather than So it's easy to miss somebody's email. Thank you.
Thinking about having
I don't think I'll necessarily be present at every one, but if the topic sort of
Sure.
I'll come along.
Well, I normally send them out round about the time that the area newsletter goes out, in the hope that the area newsletter will put them in, which it usually, but not invariably does.
I'm not
But
sure.
always.
I don't think I see the area. I'm not in the same area meeting as you, so that's why I wouldn't see it.
Right. Okay.
We're in West Wilts and East Somerset.
Well, you're on my list now, so we should be all right.
And next week?
Yes, hold on a minute. Right. Sue Jones. She's a Quaker from Wales, and she was in Palestine last year. She was monitoring human rights with the EAPPI. I'm afraid I'm not sure what that stands for.
I'll tell you, it's ecumenical accompaniers in Palestine and Israel.
Sounds right. Well, she's going to be talking next week about, it's called Under Occupation, Human Rights on Issues on the West Bank. So that's next week. Over to you, Ray.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for your talk to this morning, folks. And
Really inspiring. Thank you.
as usual,
Yes, thank you.
inspiring and brought lots of other thoughts on board. Apologies, I have a slight cough. But yes, thank you very much. And
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
good afternoon
Everybody,
to you all.
blessings.